So one morning I went out to take out the trash. Now I don't usually go through garbage bins, but I just took a look in the garbage container as I was throwing the trash in. I obviously didn't record the first time around, so this is a dramatic reenactment. When I opened the lid up, I saw what looked to be quite a modern laptop. And no, I didn't plant it there myself, Jesus. I know nowadays you can't believe anything you see on the internet. But once you see the condition this thing was in, I think you'll find it a bit more believable. Apart from the computer, I also saw some other electronic junk around the dumpster. I don't know why, but these power adapters all had their wires cut off, presumably for the copper. So I just decided to put them all in my car. I've also found a racing wheel, some brackets, hard disk drive, and some other components. I had absolutely no confidence in any of these things working, especially the laptop, because it was in pieces, but I was just curious. I've managed to dig out all the components of the laptop, which was kinda tricky actually. Now I don't know if you could tell, but this thing was sitting kinda deep in that dumpster, which meant that I had to dive deep or fish it out or something. And it's not like I mind, but I just didn't really want people to see me because this is my neighborhood. So I was looking out for people passing by, but I guess I wasn't careful enough. Yeah, my wife saw me through the window and she was super disappointed. Like it wasn't enough that I kept bringing all these old computers from auctions and marketplaces. I had to start bringing in like literal trash from dumpsters. Poor thing. But I mean, you guys understand, right? Like, what was I supposed to do? Leave this thing in the garbage? But I said, don't worry, honey. It's for a video on YouTube.
It's gonna be a video.
So yeah, I got this thing home, and a couple of days later, I decided to see what the hell to do with it. And before doing any sort of work on it, I wanted to put on some gloves. Now, by looking at the back cover, I could see that this notebook was an Asus model D509A, which is their Vivobook series, and this particular model was released around 2020. I checked the serial number on the product page, and it turns out that the warranty expired in 2022. So this notebook's freaking new. It's newer than my daily driver notebook. I found it listed on various websites for around 400 to 600 bucks. But what good is that if the notebook is completely goosed? So even though I was positive this thing wasn't in any sort of a working order, I still wanted to at least try to turn it on, just for shits and giggles. So the first thing I wanted to test out was the motherboard. So I got it out and I just started visually inspecting it. I also got some other components out like the fan, and yeah, this thing was dusty as heck. I could also tell that this thing was abused, molested, and physically violated.
Jesus. What the fuck?
The top case and the keyboard frame were bent pretty badly.
Somebody got mad at this thing. Jesus Lord. Ugh. Wow. Just looking at this board, I do see some corrosion. So perhaps this thing was exposed to some water or liquid or something. Yeah, there's some old corrosion here. So yeah, this could have been liquid damage. I'm also not sure whether or not there are any components missing. Like this here, is this supposed to be populated? Is this where the GPU goes or what? I don't know, but before testing this board in any way, I would just like to give this a good scrub with alcohol.
So that's what I've proceeded to do. I got a bucket and I just soaked this thing in alcohol. Ugh. And also I gave it a good scrub with a toothbrush. Now while I'm cleaning this thing, let me just talk a minute about the fake dumpster finds. I'm aware there's a whole genre of videos of people pretending to find treasure in the dumpsters. I've seen videos where like a guy stumbles upon a broken Game Boy and then restores it to immaculate shape. And even though I guess there's no proof that I haven't broken this computer myself and then planted it in the dumpster, I guess you'll have to take my word for it. So anyway, after scrubbing this thing and soaking it for a couple of hours, I've decided it was time to give it a test. This thing had an empty RAM slot at the bottom, so I've decided to put in a spare DDR4 RAM stick I had. Turns out this computer actually has 4 gigs of onboard RAM, but extra memory is always appreciated. Now this thing actually takes DC power from a barrel jack. It has a 19-volt input here, but it also has a USB-C port here, which I think is PD, power delivery compliant. And the reason I think that is because it's kind of close to the barrel jack, so I assume that it also deals with power. So what we'll do is we'll try plugging in a barrel jack first, and then if that doesn't work, we'll try plugging in the USB-C power adapter. I have absolutely zero confidence in any of this working, but I guess it's worth a shot. So since I didn't have a proper power adapter for this thing, I just ended up using a universal laptop charger. I also have my fan hooked up just to see whether or not it spins. Huh. Yeah. I've ended up cleaning and hooking up the I/O board because it had the indicator lights on it. I've also hooked up the keyboard just so I could turn it on, even though I had no idea whether or not the keyboard worked. So after fiddling with it for a few minutes, this is what happened. Oh God. Jesus Lord. Look at this. Are you seeing this? Holy crap. This thing is glowing. So it has life, at least to some degree. Okay, let's try pressing the power button. Did you guys see that? The fan moved. So I guess it's trying to boot. This fan is full of dust. Come on, you. Live. God damn it. The CPU is actually getting quite hot. So I wonder whether or not that has to do with anything. Perhaps this thing is just overheating. Let's try taking off the heatsink. Now, I'm not a laptop technician or whatever, and I'm no expert on any of these things, but since the fan was in such a bad shape, I thought perhaps this thing had some thermal issues. So while I was in here, I thought I might as well change out the thermal paste. So I've cleaned out the old paste and I've put in some new thermal compound. And no, I'm not showing how much because I've probably used the wrong amount. So I've put the heatsink back on, making sure not to put too much pressure on the screws. And I've also decided to put in the battery back in, just on an off chance that the computer wouldn't boot without it installed. I then tried powering the computer on a couple of times. It's trying to move. Now, given my experience with some other laptops I've worked on, I was waiting for the fan to start spinning. And even though I got some movement out of that fan, it just wouldn't stay on. Nevertheless, I've plugged in my external monitor just to see whether or not there was any activity. And I just couldn't believe my eyes. Jesus, look! The thing booted! What the hell? But this thing is barely spinning. The thing booted into BIOS. What the hell? Was it the fan the whole time? Jesus! Holy crap! It's staying on. Okay, that's nice and hot. Okay, wait just a gosh darn minute. I'm just going to put the cover back on just to give it a bit more airflow, I guess. Yeah, that's awesome. Holy crap. I can't believe this. The thing's running. Okay. At this point, I've plugged in my external USB keyboard, and I've confirmed that the USB ports were indeed working fine. So at this point, I started exploring the BIOS, and I saw that this thing was running an AMD Ryzen 3 at 2600 MHz, and that it recognized the 4 gigs of onboard RAM and also the 4 gig stick that I've installed. So 8 gigs in total. This is nuts. Okay, I'm just curious. I'm gonna check whether or not the, no, don't quit. Jesus Lord. Sorry for kind of out of frame here, but I got excited. Okay, so what I'll try is the, we'll see whether or not the keyboard works. So I'll try gently pressing the arrow keys. This thing is, the keyboard is working. Can you see that? Oh God, look. Oh fuck, I don't want to mess this up. Yeah. Look, we're going through the BIOS options. I'm just pressing the keys underneath here, and as you can see, the thing's going through the BIOS options. That's nuts, man. So even though this thing had no hard drive or an SSD, I just wanted to see whether or not it was capable of booting into the Windows installer. So I've inserted my Windows 10 installation USB but this particular one wasn't bootable, so I had to go back to my Windows computer, and I've used Rufus to make a bootable Windows 10 USB stick.
Okay, so I left this thing running for a couple of minutes and it seems to be running just fine. One thing I would like to find out is whether or not this thing can boot stably. So we're gonna try rebooting this computer a couple of times, and then if all goes well, I guess we'll try reassembling this thing to some extent.
So I've just decided to power cycle this thing a couple of times. So I've rebooted it, I turned it off and turned it back on a couple of more times.
Yep, this thing is booting just fine. That's insane, man. And the keyboard seems to be working. At least the power button and the arrow keys. Okay, let's try one more time. What a find. This laptop's freaking new. It's newer than my MacBook, for God's sakes. Okay, I found it in a freaking trash can. Okay, one thing I can tell you is that this screen is toast. I'm pretty sure there's no way this screen will work, but I'll try plugging it in just for fun, I guess.
So I could see that this LCD was thoroughly broken, but I was just kind of curious to see what it would look like hooked up to the motherboard.
Okay, so if I unplug the HDMI cable, that's nice and crackly.
So I tried hooking it up using the display cable, but I got no output at all.
So I think it's safe to say that we can probably throw this in the trash. Now the only thing that might be worth saving is that Wi-Fi antenna. I don't know, I guess we can try getting that out. And as far as the display itself goes, yeah, I think that's toast. So we'll see. Perhaps we can just save the bezel.
So I've spent a couple of minutes detaching the LCD from the plastic bezel.
Disconnect this. I mean, there's the camera, but I don't think I'll be doing any video conferencing on this thing. And even if I do, I mean, I'll get a USB camera. So yeah, we'll save the lid, because I don't know why. But this thing, oh, wait. The cable was disconnected. No, wait just a gosh darn minute here. Come on, get you off. This was unplugged. Again, given the state of this thing, I don't think it's worth trying out, but I'm curious. Okay, so that's in. We'll try putting this side in. Oh yeah, that's kind of cool actually. Yeah. No saving that. At this point, I actually do have a theory as to what happened to this computer. So somebody probably broke the screen, and then I guess they tried taking it apart or something. And when they figured out that they couldn't fix it, I guess they just wanted to rage quit this thing, and they tried breaking it in half and throwing it in the garbage. Or I also have another theory, given the corrosion that was on the motherboard. Perhaps they spilled something on the computer and then tried fixing it, and when they weren't able to fix it, I guess they tried snapping the poor thing in half, and then they broke the LCD screen. I'm not sure, but I will save this display cable though, just on an off chance that I need it someday. So now that we have a better idea of what's working and what's not working on this thing, we can go ahead and reassemble this thing to some degree, and then we'll try playing with it some more. I'll give this thing a quick wash, and one unfortunate thing is the person who took this thing apart didn't remove all the screws, so they snapped the corner off of it. It's not a huge deal, but we'll try saving that later. So since we're not going to be using the screen, I'm actually going to take the hinge off, because I'm just going to use this thing with an external screen, and depending on whether or not the keyboard works, I guess we can also use the keyboard on this thing. And this battery also seems to be working, because I unplugged the power and it didn't turn off, so this battery might still be good. I don't know about the trackpad. I'll guess we'll check that out later. So we'll take the motherboard off, take this thing off. Okay, so this is the hinge mechanism, and it seems to be working. Yeah, as it is, I'll probably throw that in the trash too. Okay, so this is the top case. Now, yeah, I guess whoever threw this in the trash, they got super pissed off and they just wanted to snap the poor thing in half. I'll try, oh god, bending this thing back into place. Poor thing. Yeah, this side. This thing is mostly made out of plastic, but there is a steel frame underneath. So, yeah. Oh, this speaker flapping around. You know what? We'll take the speakers out too, and then we'll reinstall them later. Okay. So it has all the components inside, which is awesome. Okay, we'll also take this off because we're going to be giving this thing a good clean after we're done with the chiropractics bit. This thing also has a bend here, so I'll try getting my pliers in there like that.
So I tried my best to straighten this thing out without breaking it even more.
Looking a bit more straight. Come on. Yeah, it's looking better already. Trackpad seems to click fine. Awesome.
So I gave the whole top case and the keyboard a good clean using my alcohol solution.
This is where the fan was, which is why there's dust in there. This is the hard drive caddy. And unfortunately, I don't have a hard drive cable going from this to the board, so I might have to find that. Or this thing also has an M.2 slot for an SSD. So I think I'm just going to install one in there, but we'll see.
So I started reassembling the top case of this thing, and I just wanted to do a public service announcement. So if you break a screen on your notebook, or the screen goes out or whatever, there's no need to throw it out. You can still use the thing in this kind of beheaded mode, and it's gonna work just fine. After reassembling, I've set up the computer on my desk, and I just turned it on a couple of more times just to make sure that it all still worked properly. I still had some components to install, like an SSD and also that Wi-Fi antenna. So that antenna took a bit of time to detach from the plastic frame, but I eventually got it out. So I've disassembled the notebook again, and even though this thing was missing the majority of the screws, it actually has some plastic snaps that hold it together quite nicely. And after digging around, I've managed to find an M.2 SSD. Now this thing actually has an NVMe slot, but the SSD I had on hand was a SATA 3 interface, which is compatible but not as fast, so I might upgrade that in the future. I routed the antenna cable around the plastic hard drive bay, just because I thought it would give me better reception than if I left it off. After that, it was time to test this computer some more. I removed the Mac Mini I featured in a previous video from my desk because it was time for this computer to take its place. I've hooked this thing up to an HDMI switch box I have attached to my main monitor. And this thing has a little remote which allows me to switch between various inputs. So I turned this thing on and I plugged in the bootable Windows 10 USB stick. And after setting the boot options in the BIOS menu, the installation was moving along smoothly, and after a couple of minutes I was scared shitless by the Cortana assistant.
Hi there, I'm Cortana, and I'm here to help.
What the hell?
A little sign in here, a touch of Wi-Fi there, and we'll have your PC ready for all you plan to do.
Well, okay. Jesus.
Use your voice or the keyboard along the way, and if you'd like me to stay quiet, just select the little microphone.
Yep. Thank you very much. Let's dig in. What is this, man? So it's detecting the Wi-Fi networks. So the keyboard seems to be working.
So I've used this portion of the installation to test out the trackpad and the keyboard and the Wi-Fi chip, and it all seemed to just work, which was amazing. And after a while, I got to the Windows 10 splash screen.
Hi.
And I was still in disbelief that any of this was actually happening.
I can't believe this. This is unbelievable. This piece of trash just loaded into Windows 10. And as far as I can tell, just by running the installation, everything works on this thing. The first thing I would like to test out is the keyboard. So we're gonna go to, we're gonna go to Notepad, and we're gonna test out every key on this keyboard.
I mean, you saw the state of that keyboard, and yet I was pressing every single key on it, and they all just worked.
Man, so every single key on this keyboard seemed to be working, but one thing I did notice is that the trackpad, so the trackpad is working fine, and the touch click thing is also working, but if I actually click the button, yeah, that doesn't seem to be, I don't know, like if I want to drag the thing, the window, Yeah, it doesn't want to do that. Also, the right click doesn't seem to be working, which is not a huge deal because, as you'll soon see, I'm not going to be using the mouse or the keyboard on this thing, but it's nice to know that it's working.
I then went to the device manager to see which devices still needed to be configured.
So yeah, there are certain things that need to be updated as far as the drivers are concerned, but the majority of things are working just fine. So what I'll do is we'll go online just using this computer and we'll see whether or not the internet works, and we'll download some drivers for this thing and we'll get it all set up. Fuck off. God damn it, Edge.
So I went to the manufacturer's website and I found all the latest drivers for chipset, graphics, and all the rest of the components. After making sure the computer works as it should, it was time to button it up. I made sure all the snaps clicked in their place and also to install what little screws were left on the bottom cover, and also to find a more permanent spot for this trash-picked gem.
Okay, so we're back at my desk where I have my main computer over there, and this monitor, as you saw, has a HDMI switcher in the back, which allows me to switch between 3 different inputs. So I would like to have that thing hooked up to one of the inputs at the back of this computer, but I don't want to really have it here on the desk because, as well, it's going to be a second computer and I don't need it to be right here on the desk, and it's quite large compared to the Mac Mini that was here before. So I'm gonna tell you what I'll do. So this desk is quite old and it sucks, but it does have this stupid little compartment down there, which is, you would think this is like lost space, but as you can see, this is actually where I keep some of my backup computers. So currently I have a little 11-inch MacBook here, which I got a couple of months ago for very cheap, and I plan to install a working operating system on that. And I also have my huge 17-inch
Nice
MacBook Pro. This is the one that you saw me repair, where I changed the thermal paste and spent like half my life trying to get Windows installed. So yeah, I still use this for band practice. So I have GarageBand loaded on here, and yeah, and I take this with me to band practice, and I'm not too worried about scuffing it up and banging it up. And this is where I would like to put this laptop. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to install some dongles in here, which is going to allow me to use my main keyboard and mouse. And then we're going to route some of these cables under the desk and clean it up a little bit. And yeah, and this is going to be my dedicated Windows 10 computer, and we're gonna run it through its paces.
So I've spent a couple of minutes rerouting and reinstalling some of the cables to make sure that it's all nice and neat. I was also kind of concerned about the airflow in that little compartment, but I kept checking the temperature when I was testing this computer and it stayed nice and cool.
The way it is now, I'm going to have access to my... Ah shit, that piece fell off. Sucks. So the way I have it installed here, I'm going to have access to my power button and also to the USB port in case I have some accessories I want to plug from the table.
So I've hooked up my wireless keyboard and mouse to this thing and I just started playing with it. The computer was super responsive and it stayed nice and quiet and cool under that desk. Browsing the web on this thing felt just as smooth as my modern MacBook. So I wanted to run some tests and benchmarks on this thing, and I've decided to start with Geekbench. After running the benchmark, I could see that this thing scored around 750 on a single core and around 1200 on multi-core, which I mean meant nothing to me because I'm not an expert on these tests. So I ran the same benchmark on my main MacBook computer, and yeah, that one scored higher. But after looking it up, I could see that the score I got on this laptop was above average. But I really wanted to test the real-life performance of this thing, so I've downloaded a couple of pieces of software to help along with that. Another thing I've added to this thing is a super drive, so I can load some of my physical software. So I wanted to see how this system would fare playing some games. So I started with an older one. This is Unreal Tournament 2004, which I like testing out on all my systems. It had no issues running on this 64-bit installation of Windows 10. Now this thing doesn't have dedicated graphics, it's actually running on integrated graphics chip, and it has shared VRAM, and you can actually set the amount of shared memory in the BIOS. I think mine is set to around 2 gigs. So even though this is not a graphics powerhouse, I still wanted to push the gaming capabilities of this machine, and what better way of doing that than running Crysis. So I do understand that Crysis long stopped being the go-to gaming benchmark, but I still like testing it out on my machines, and after running the necessary patches and updates and doing some workarounds, it ran fine on this Windows 10 machine. The monitor I'm hooking this thing up to has a soundbar built in, but it's quite shitty, and I found that the built-in speakers actually sound kinda cool, especially coming from that little cubby. They work really good. As far as the performance goes, this thing ran Crysis on high settings, and the gameplay was more than playable. The frame rate for the most part fell between 20 and 30 FPS, which I thought was doing pretty good for a laptop found in the freaking garbage. So no, I don't think this qualifies as a gaming laptop, and I also don't think this is a particularly high-end notebook. This is more of a middle-of-the-road, kinda consumer-level grade notebook selling for around 500 bucks. But it's just a couple of years old, and it definitely doesn't belong in a dumpster, even if it has a broken screen. So I took it upon myself to give this computer its second life. So other than using this thing as my dedicated Windows 10 machine, I wanted to try doing something that I wasn't able to do on the previous Mac Mini machine that I've been using as a Windows 10 machine, and that's editing videos. Now that would be a challenge not only for this notebook but also for me, because I've never used a Windows machine to edit my videos. I've always used a Mac before, so there were some things I honestly didn't know how to do. I figured out I could transfer the videos from my iPhone to the desktop just using File Explorer, which is nice. But then it was time to edit them, and this is where I hit my first roadblock, because I've been using iMovie for as long as I can remember. So I started looking into free Windows editing software, and I found this editor called Olive. But it just wasn't similar enough to the experience I had with iMovie, so I just couldn't get used to it. And then I found DaVinci Resolve, and as far as I'm concerned, this is it. I immediately felt right at home, and I was happy to see that it even had some of the same hotkey arrangement as iMovie. And to prove my point, I just decided to take the plunge and to edit this very video you're watching on this garbage notebook. Now, even though I was super impressed by the performance and just smoothness of the whole experience, I did have some things I found annoying just as a Mac user. For example, I like using AirDrop between my devices, and even though I found some applications that claim to be able to receive AirDrops from iPhone, I just couldn't get that to work. I also still use my iPhone's mic for voiceovers, and even though that's embarrassing, you can actually get the mic to pop up under audio input devices in macOS. So for this video, I've used the voice memo application on my iPhone, and I actually used WhatsApp to transfer the voice memos to my PC. So if you're a subscriber, let me know in the comments whether or not you've noticed any differences between this video and my previous ones that were edited on a Mac. And if you're not subscribed and you like this video, you might want to consider subscribing. I do all sorts of tech repairs, mods, and overviews, usually on old junk. And I'm so happy I have another computer capable of editing these videos in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!